The city stretched out beyond her window like a bed of fallen stars, the lights flickering against the darkness in a way that made Celeste Rivera feel even smaller. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, her breath clouding the surface as if the window itself might sigh with her. At 26, she was already tired of disappointment. Her art studio downtown had become less a sanctuary and more a graveyard for half-finished canvases, each one a reminder that inspiration had abandoned her. The bills stacked on the counter mocked her with their persistence, red letters warning her of eviction and shut-offs. Even the refrigerator rattled hollow when she opened it, as though it, too, had given up on her. She closed her eyes, willing herself not to cry again. She had promised herself she would not break tonight, not for loneliness, not for hunger, not for the gnawing fear that she was invisible in a world too busy to notice her. Then came the knock. It was soft, almost polite, yet startling in the midnight silence. Her eyes snapped open, and her heart gave a sharp, painful beat. No one visited her at this hour. She tightened her silk robe around her, the fabric whispering against her bare skin, and crept toward the door. The second knock came, deliberate and patient, as though the visitor knew she was there. Celeste hesitated, her fingers trembling as she slid the chain lock into place and peered through the peephole. A man stood in the dim hallway light, tall and broad-shouldered, his suit crisp and expensive despite the lateness of the hour. Dark hair framed a face both refined and severe, but it was his eyes that froze her, storm gray, unyielding, and fixed straight on the door as if he could see her watching him. "Miss Rivera," his voice was deep, smooth, like aged whiskey poured into crystal. "My name is Adrian Cross. I need to speak with you about something that could change your life." Her pulse thundered in her ears. She had heard the name before. Cross Industries, wealth and power whispered in the business pages, but never imagined it would find its way to her apartment door. "It's very late, Mr. Cross," she managed, her voice sharper than she felt. "I know, and I apologize," he said, calm but insistent. "What I have to offer cannot wait." He lifted a manila envelope, the paper thick even from this distance. "May I come in? I promise you'll want to hear what I have to say." Every instinct screamed at her to shut the door, to turn the lock, to hide. Yet something in his voice pulled at her, low and persuasive, carrying a weight that pressed against her doubts. Against reason, against the caution drilled into her by years of struggle, she slid the chain free and stepped back. Adrian Cross entered her small apartment, and the space seemed to shrink around him. He carried himself like a storm contained within human form, his presence filling the air with electricity. He set the envelope on the coffee table and turned toward her with a smile that was both unsettling and captivating. "You're even more beautiful than your photos," he said softly. Celeste's stomach nodded. "What photos? I don't understand what this is about." "I've been watching you, not in a way meant to frighten you," he added quickly, reading the alarm in her widened eyes. "I've observed your work, your character, your struggles. I know about the bills, the gallery that rejected your paintings, the fact you haven't eaten a proper meal in days." Shame burned hot on her cheeks. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I make it my business to know everything about the people who interest me." He stepped closer, and she caught the faint scent of his cologne, spiced, masculine, dizzying. His gaze locked onto hers. "And you, Celeste Rivera, interbossessions, asked me very much." Her throat dried, words sticking like ash. "What do you want?" Adrian opened the envelope with precise hands, sliding out a stack of papers that gleamed under the dim lamp. His expression didn't falter. "I want to marry you." The words struck her like a blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She laughed once, a brittle sound. "Excuse me?" "I need a wife. You need security. It's a simple arrangement. 2 years of marriage, $5 million paid in installments, your debts cleared immediately." His eyes softened, though his tone stayed firm. "You'll have everything you need to focus on your art." Celeste collapsed onto the couch, her legs weak. She wanted to tell him he was insane, that she barely knew his name, but his gaze pinned her, unwavering, unshakable. No messy emotions, he continued, moving closer, his voice lowering to something almost intimate. No complications, just a mutually beneficial contract. And why me? She whispered. Adrian's lips curved in a faint, enigmatic smile. Because you won't fall in love with me and ruin everything. The certainty in his tone sent a strange flutter through her chest. Her skin tingled when he reached out and brushed her cheek with the barest touch, his fingers warm against her chilled skin. Sometimes crazy is exactly what we need, he murmured. Her breath caught, and in that moment, Celeste knew her life had already begun to change. Celeste barely slept after Adrian Cross left her apartment. The papers he had set on her table still lay there like a dangerous secret waiting to be opened. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his storm-gray gaze and felt the brush of his fingers against her cheek. The city outside carried on as if nothing had changed, but inside her tiny apartment, everything felt different. Her world had tilted on its axis and she was caught between terror and temptation. The next morning she tried to paint, but her brush refused to obey her hand. Airy stroke came out uneven, jagged, her emotions spilling across the canvas in restless colors. She dropped the brush, her fingers shaking. All she could see was the number 5 million echoing in her mind like a siren. That much money could silence her landlord, erase the debt collectors, put food in her refrigerator, and give her the freedom to paint without fear. But could she really tie herself to a stranger to gain it? Her phone buzzed. Rosa's name lit up the screen. Celeste snatched it up, her throat dry. Rosa was her best friend since childhood, blunt and loyal to the bone. If anyone could ground her in this storm, it was Rosa. Celeste explained in fragments what had happened, her voice trembling as she described Adrian's midnight visit. Rosa gasped so loudly that Celeste had to pull the phone away from her ear. "He wants to marry you for money, Celeste. That's insane. You can't actually be considering it." Rosa's tone was sharp, her disbelief cutting. "I know it sounds insane," Celeste whispered, "but Rosa, you didn't see him. He was so certain, so calm, like he already knew I'd say yes, and he knew things about me that no one else does. That's even worse. He's dangerous. A man like that doesn't show up at midnight offering money unless he has an agenda. You need to burn those papers and forget his name." Celeste wanted to agree. She wanted to throw the envelope in the trash and never think about Adrian Cross again. But the gnawing hunger in her stomach reminded her she hadn't eaten properly in days. The electricity bill on the counter reminded her she was 3 days from darkness. The truth was unavoidable. Her life was collapsing, and Adrian Cross had handed her a lifeline, even if it was made of chains. That evening, when her mother called from across the country, Celeste hoped for comfort. Instead, she received worry. "Marry a stranger." "No, Celeste, that is not the future I dreamed for you. Love matters. Don't trade yourself away like this." Her mother's voice was thick with sorrow. "I raised you to fight, not to surrender." Celeste hung up, torn in two. She spent the day pacing, her heart lurching every time she glanced at the envelope. She tried to imagine Adrian's world, the suits, the mansions, the empire he commanded. A world so far from her threadbare existence. And yet she remembered the way he looked at her, not with pity, but with intensity, as though she mattered more than she believed herself to. By nightfall, she knew she couldn't delay. Adrian had told her he wanted an answer. Her chest tightened when the knock came again, soft but certain, as if he had known she wouldn't resist his offer. She opened the door to find him standing there, immaculate as before, his eyes darkened with a hunger she couldn't name. "Well?" he asked, his voice low, charged with expectation. Celeste's hand shook on the doorknob. Her mind screamed warnings, but her body betrayed her with a rush of heat. She swallowed, forcing the words past her lips. "I'll marry you." Adrian's eyes softened, though his jaw remained firm, as if he had expected nothing less. He stepped into her apartment once more, and this time the air between them felt heavier, thick with a promise that carried both salvation and danger. "You won't regret this, Celeste," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'll take care of you." She lifted her chin, forcing steel into her voice even as her heart quaked. This is business. Don't forget that. His lips curved into something between a smile and a vow. Sometimes business and destiny look the same. Celeste felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. She had stepped into the unknown, and though every nerve in her body screamed she should turn back, she couldn't stop herself. The trap had closed, and she was walking straight into it with her eyes wide open. The chapel was small and hidden away in the rolling hills of Napa Valley, a place meant for quiet vows and whispered promises. Easte stood in front of the mirror in a white dress Adrian had chosen for her, the fabric simple yet elegant, clinging to her like a second skin. A string of pearls rested against her throat, cool and heavy, and for a moment she wondered if they were a gift or a collar. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the veil, and her reflection looked back at her with wide, uncertain eyes. This was not how she imagined her wedding day. No flowers of her choosing, no friends giggling beside her, no years of love leading to this moment. It was a bargain sealed with ink and desperation. Yet when the chapel doors opened and Adrian Cross turned to watch her walk down the aisle, the world tilted. He stood there in a black tuxedo, tall and devastatingly composed, but his storm-gray eyes softened when they met hers. For a heartbeat, she forgot the contract, forgot the hunger and the bills, forgot everything except the heat that raced through her veins. Each step toward him felt like falling deeper into a story she did not write but could no longer escape. The minister's words floated like echoes, almost dreamlike, until the vows came. Adrian's hand closed around hers, strong and steady, and his voice did not waver when he said, "I do." When it was her turn, her throat locked, panic clawing at her. She was about to bind her life to a stranger, and yet the intensity in his gaze burned through her hesitation. Her voice came out faint, but certain. "I do." The minister smiled and gave the final words. "You may kiss the bride." Adrian's hands lifted to her face with a gentleness that startled her. His breath brushed her lips as he whispered two words meant only for her. "Trust me." Then his mouth claimed hers. It was supposed to be ceremonial, nothing more than a gesture for the witnesses gathered. Instead, it broke open something raw and hungry between them. His lips moved against hers with a fire that stole her breath, and her fingers clenched at his jacket as if holding on for survival. The chapel faded, the guests blurred, and there was only his kiss, fierce and consuming, a promise and a warning all at once. When he finally drew back, applause echoed around them, but Celeste barely heard it. Her pulse thundered and her knees threatened to give way under the weight of what had just ignited. The reception was small, only a few family members and Adrian's closest associates. Celeste played the role of the perfect new wife, smiling when expected, nodding when introductions were made, but her body betrayed her. Every time Adrian touched her arm, her back, her hand, her skin flared alive. Every look he gave her was weighted, his storm-gray eyes smoldering as if he fought the same fire she did. During their first dance, he pulled her close enough that her body pressed to his, the music a distant hum compared to the thunder of her heartbeat. His breath warmed her ear as he murmured, "You're a natural at this," she whispered back. "At what, being your wife?" His arm tightened, his lips grazing the edge of her jaw as he answered, "I'm beginning to think this arrangement will be more difficult than I planned." Her breath caught. "Why?" His reply was a confession wrapped in danger. "Because I can't remember this is supposed to be fake." The words set her blood racing. She pulled back to look at him, and what she saw in his eyes was not part of any contract. It was desire, deep and unrestrained, and it terrified her as much as it thrilled her. By the time the night ended and Adrian carried her over the threshold of his mansion, Celeste knew her life had crossed a point of no return. She had stepped into a world where every moment with him blurred the line between bargain and passion, and though she told herself to stay guarded, his whisper still echoed inside her like a spell. "Trust me." The mansion was unlike anything Celeste had ever seen, a sprawling masterpiece of stone and glass glowing beneath the moonlight. Adrian carried her across, Cross the threshold with effortless strength, his arm steady around her waist, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine this was real, that she was stepping into the life of a woman truly chosen and cherished. But the reminder of the contract sat heavy in the back of her mind, a chain disguised as a crown. Inside, the foyer opened into soaring ceilings and polished marble floors that seemed too perfect for her paint-stained hands and second-hand shoes. Adrian set her down gently, his eyes scanning her face as though reading every flicker of doubt and desire. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cross," he said, his voice low and commanding. The words sent a shiver down her spine, not because they felt false, but because they felt dangerously true. He offered to show her to the east wing where a suite had been prepared, complete with flowers, velvet drapes, and her belongings carefully arranged, as if she had always belonged there. Yet when he paused in the doorway, his jaw was tight, his storm-gray eyes shadowed with something unspoken. "Celeste," he said, his voice rough. "If you want me to leave, tell me now, because if I kiss you again, I will not stop this time." Her heart hammered against her ribs. She remembered the heat of his lips at the altar, the way her body had betrayed her with need. She thought of the deal they had struck, the cold promise of no emotions, no complications. Yet in that moment she realized she no longer cared about rules or boundaries. She stepped closer until her breath mingled with his. "Then don't stop," she whispered. A sound escaped him, half a groan and half a surrender. Adrian closed the space between them, and his mouth crashed against hers, desperate and hungry. His hands tangled in her hair as though he had been starving for this, and Celeste melted into him with a need she could not deny. Every inch of her body responded to his touch, her skin alive with fire, as his lips traced the line of her jaw and down to the curve of her neck. He lifted her easily, carrying her past the flowers and silken curtains into the center of the room. The bed waited behind them, but in that moment, the world narrowed to his touch and his whisper against her skin. "Trust me," he murmured again, the words a vow and a temptation. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the storm that had been building between them since the night he appeared at her door. Clothes fell away in a trail that marked their surrender to something neither of them had planned. What had begun as a bargain was now a fire too fierce to control. His hands moved over her with reverence and urgency, and she felt both claimed and freed all at once. The silence of the mansion was broken by the rhythm of their breath and the pounding of their hearts as they gave in to the desire that had stalked them since the first kiss. When it was over, Celeste lay against his chest, the steady beat of his heart grounding her in a reality that felt more dangerous than any contract. Adrian's arms tightened around her as if he feared she might vanish, and for a fleeting second she saw something raw in his eyes, something unguarded and vulnerable. In the quiet that followed, he whispered the words again, softer this time, as if they were meant for his own soul as much as hers. "Trust me." And though every part of her screamed that she should guard her heart, Celeste knew she already had crossed the line. She was no longer just Mrs. Cross by contract. She was a woman caught in a web of passion, secrets, and the growing terror that she was falling in love with a man who had sworn never to love again. The morning light spilled through silk curtains, golden and warm, but Celeste woke with her heart pounding as if she had done something forbidden. Adrian's arm was still around her waist, his chest steady beneath her cheek, his breathing deep with sleep. She lay still, listening to the beat of his heart, remembering every moment of the night before. What had begun as a business deal had burned into something fierce and undeniable. She should have felt shame or regret, but instead she felt alive, as though she had stepped into a new world and could never return to the old one. When Adrian stirred, his lips brushed her temple, his voice husky with sleep. "Good morning, Mrs. Cross." The sound of it made her stomach flutter and her pulse race. She whispered back, "Good morning," but in the quiet of her mind a question screamed louder than any greeting. How long could they pretend this was still just a contract? In the days that followed, life at the mansion shifted into a rhythm she had not expected. Adrian worked from his private office, always surrounded by papers and calls, while Celeste moved her paints and canvases into the sunroom where the light was perfect. yet the lines between their separate worlds blurred with every passing hour. He brought her coffee while she painted, sometimes lingering too long, his storm-gray eyes dark with something unspoken. She wandered into his office with excuses about dinner, secretly just to catch the warmth of his smile when he looked up from his desk. The tension between them grew heavier. What began as stolen glances became stolen touches, brushes of hands in the hallway, kisses in shadowed corners that left her dizzy. At night, they promised themselves they would sleep apart, but each morning she woke tangled in his sheets, his arms a cage she did not want to escape. But beneath the growing passion, unease coiled tighter. Celeste noticed the way Adrian's expression hardened when his phone rang late at night, the way he would leave the room to answer, his voice low and clipped. Once she found him staring out of the window long after midnight, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand, his jaw clenched as though he was fighting ghosts she could not see. One afternoon, as she stood at her easel with paint dripping down the canvas, Adrian came up behind her. His hands slid over her hips, his lips grazing the sensitive curve of her neck. "You're distracting me," she whispered, though her body leaned into his. "Good," he murmured against her skin. "I like distracting you." She turned, paint streaked across her fingers, pressing her palm to his chest. "Adrian, what are we doing?" This wasn't supposed to happen. He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones, his eyes blazing with a raw honesty that shook her. "I know. Every time I remind myself this is business, you laugh or you smile, and I forget everything except how much I want you." Her heart twisted. "I feel the same," she admitted, her voice breaking with fear. "But Adrian, this has an end. 18 months from now you walk away, I walk away, and all of this becomes a memory." He froze, as if her words pierced something deep inside, then his jaw tightened. "Maybe we need to talk about changing the contract." Before Celeste could answer, his phone buzzed sharply. He pulled it from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened instantly. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced with steel. He excused himself, his steps clipped and fast, leaving her standing in the studio with paint dripping down her canvas and dread rising in her chest. When he returned much later, he looked older, his face shadowed with something more dangerous than exhaustion. "There's something you need to know," he said, his voice low and grim. "The marriage wasn't only about family obligations. I was being blackmailed." The word cracked through the air like a thunderclap. Celeste's brush slipped from her hand, paint splattering across the floor. Blackmailed by who? Adrian's eyes locked on hers, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw fear in his gaze. By someone who won't stop until they destroy me. Celeste's stomach clenched as she realized the truth. The passion that bound them together was only the beginning. Something darker and far more dangerous had already begun to close in around them. Celeste stood frozen in the studio, her hands stained with paint, her breath caught in her chest. Adrian's words still hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Blackmailed. The man who seemed untouchable, who carried himself with the power of storms and the confidence of kings, had just confessed that someone held him in chains. The thought shook her in a way she could not explain. Adrian paced the length of the room, his hand running through his dark hair as though he could scrub away the confession. His usually calm expression was stripped bare, revealing tension that carved sharp lines across his face. He finally stopped, his eyes locking onto hers with a weight that made her knees weaken. "I didn't tell you before because I wanted to protect you. The less you knew, the safer you were." Her voice trembled when she asked the question she already dreaded. "Who is it, Adrian, who has that kind of power over you?" For a moment, silence pressed between them, and then he spoke the name with bitterness that made her skin prickle. Victoria Sterling. The name was unfamiliar to Celeste, but the way he said it was enough to set alarm bells ringing. Adrian's jaw tightened. "She was my business partner once. Brilliant, ruthless, ambitious. She discovered things about my past, mistakes I made when I was younger. She threatened to expose them unless I agreed to marry her." Celeste's stomach turned cold. "And instead, you married me." His eyes softened, but his words only deepened the storm inside her. I needed a way out, Celeste. But I didn't choose you out of convenience. I had already seen you at gallery openings, already felt drawn to you in ways I couldn't explain. You were the one I trusted to stand beside me, even if you didn't know the whole truth. Her chest tightened with betrayal. So I was your escape plan. His hand reached for hers, but she pulled back, paint smearing across her skin like war paint. You lied to me, Adrian. You made it sound like a business deal when in reality you were using me to fight your enemy. His voice grew desperate, raw. I was trying to keep you safe. Victoria is dangerous. She doesn't just want my company. She wants me. And now that I've chosen you, she'll come for both of us. As if summoned by the very words, the doorbell echoed through the mansion. Adrian's shoulders stiffened. A chill swept through Celeste as the housekeeper appeared in the doorway, pale and hesitant. There's a woman here to see you, sir. She says her name is Victoria Sterling. Adrian cursed under his breath, a sound Celeste had never heard from him before. Moments later, a figure swept into the room with the confidence of a queen entering her throne room. Tall, blonde, and dressed in an elegant black dress that clung to her like armor, Victoria Sterling radiated the kind of cold beauty that drew attention without warmth. Her eyes glittered with calculation as they slid over Celeste, dismissing her with one cruel sweep. So this is the little artist who stole my fiancé. Victoria's voice was honeyed poison, smooth and cutting. We were never engaged, Adrian said sharply, his tone colder than ice. Details. Victoria waved her hand as if his words were beneath her. What matters is this. I still hold everything that can ruin you. Photographs, documents, proof of the reckless boy you once were. And now I have something even better. Her gaze landed on Celeste with cruel delight. Did you know your marriage is fake, darling? I have a copy of your contract. The press would love to hear about the billionaire who bought himself a bride. Celeste's chest constricted, her throat tight as her heart hammered in panic. The room seemed to close in, every wall echoing with Victoria's words. Adrian stepped in front of her, his body shielding hers, his voice hard with defiance. You won't touch her, Victoria. But Victoria only laughed, the sound sharp and chilling. You don't get to decide. You have 24 hours, Adrian. Either she disappears quietly or I destroy you both. With a final smile sharp enough to wound, Victoria turned and swept out, leaving the echo of her heels clicking against marble like a countdown to doom. Celeste sank into a chair, her whole body trembling. Her mind reeled with questions and terror. This was bigger than unpaid bills and lonely nights. She was caught in a war between a powerful man and a ruthless woman, and she had no idea how to survive it. Adrian knelt before her, gripping her hands tightly, his storm-gray eyes burning with something fierce. Celeste, listen to me. What started as a contract has become something I never expected. I swore I would never love again, but now I'm terrified because I'm falling in love with you. And she knows it. Her breath caught, her heart breaking and soaring at the same time. Love. He had said the one word he had sworn he would never allow. And now, with Victoria's threat hanging over them like a blade, Celeste realized their story had already crossed into dangerous territory. This was no longer just about survival or contracts. This was about a love powerful enough to destroy them or to save them. The mansion felt colder after Victoria's departure, as if her presence had poisoned the very air. Celeste paced the length of the living room, her arms wrapped around herself, while Adrian stood near the fireplace, staring into the flames as though they might hold the answers he sought. Every tick of the clock hammered against her nerves, the countdown Victoria had given them echoing louder than any sound. Finally, Celeste broke the silence, her voice raw with fear. She has proof, Adrian, proof that our marriage is nothing but a contract. If she shows the world, we'll both be ruined. Adrian turned, his face shadowed but his eyes sharp with resolve. I won't let her destroy you, or us. The word us slipped into the air like a promise Celeste had not dared to believe until now. Her chest ached with a mixture of hope and dread. She wanted to trust him, wanted to believe in the strength that radiated from him, but the image of Victoria's cruel smile haunted her. That night, Adrian called a meeting with his most trusted advisor, a man named Mason, whose loyalty had been tested over years of business wars. Mason listened silently as Adrian explained the threat, his expression unreadable until he finally spoke. If you go to war with Victoria, you need more than anger. You need evidence strong enough to break her power. If you fail, she'll bury you both. Celeste sat in the corner, her fingers knotted together, feeling like an intruder in a world of ruthless games and dangerous stakes. Yet she couldn't silence the thought that maybe she was the key. Victoria had mocked her, dismissed her as nothing more than a little artist. Perhaps that underestimation could be turned into their weapon. Later, when Mason had gone, Celeste approached Adrian in his office. He was bent over his desk, files scattered around him, exhaustion weighing on his shoulders. "Adrian," she whispered, placing a tentative hand on his arm. "Let me help." He looked up at her, his storm-gray eyes flickering with both vulnerability and fire. "This isn't your fight, Celeste." "But it is. She wants to use me to break you. If I'm already in the crossfire, then I refuse to sit in the shadows while you bleed for me." For a long moment, he studied her, his expression unreadable. Then his hand closed around hers, tight and unyielding. "You're braver than I thought. But if you're with me in this, you need to understand. There is no turning back." The following evening, Celeste accompanied Adrian to a charity gala where they knew Victoria would appear. It was a world of glittering gowns and crystal chandeliers, but beneath the glamour lurked a battlefield. Adrian's hand rested firmly at the small of Celeste's back as they entered, presenting themselves as the perfect married couple. Yet beneath the facade, tension coiled like a spring. Victoria spotted them instantly, her red lips curving into a smile that promised war. She glided across the floor, her eyes sparkling with cruel amusement. How touching, she purred, the devoted wife playing her part. "Tell me, Celeste, how much did he pay you for tonight's performance?" Celeste's pulse thundered in her ears, but instead of shrinking under the jab, she lifted her chin and met Victoria's gaze head on. "Enough to stand beside a man worth more than you could ever destroy." Adrian's grip on her waist tightened in approval, but Victoria only laughed, leaning in so close her perfume burned Celeste's nose. "We'll see how long your courage lasts when the world knows the truth." As Victoria walked away, Adrian whispered against Celeste's ear, his voice a mixture of pride and warning. "That was dangerous." Celeste's voice trembled but held steady. "So is loving you." Adrian froze, his eyes widening at her words, and for a heartbeat the crowded room disappeared. The truth had slipped out, raw and unguarded, and she knew he heard every ounce of fear and devotion woven into it. Before he could respond, Mason appeared, his face grave. "We have a problem. Someone inside your company has been feeding Victoria information." Adrian's expression darkened as he pulled Celeste closer, his body a shield against the storm closing in. The enemy wasn't just outside, it was within. And now they would have to fight not only Victoria's threats, but the traitor hidden in Adrian's own empire. The news of a traitor inside Adrian's company spread through the mansion like poison. Celeste could feel it in every glance from the staff, in every shadow stretching across the halls. She no longer knew who could be trusted, and neither did Adrian. His empire, built on control and power, was cracking beneath their feet, and Victoria's threat ticked louder with each passing hour. That night, Adrian called his inner circle together, men and women who had stood by him for years. They gathered around the long oak table in his private study, faces tense, voices low. Mason spoke first, laying out the grim reality. "Victoria is 2 steps ahead because someone is feeding her everything. Until we find the mole, nothing you say here is safe." Celeste sat at Adrian's side, feeling their world closing in. Her pulse raced as she glanced at the faces around the table, searching for the smallest flicker of guilt. But everyone was composed, every mask perfectly in place. Whoever had betrayed him was practiced at deception. When the meeting ended, Adrian lingered behind with her. His hand tightened around hers, his voice low and rough. "I built my company knowing how to fight enemies outside. I never thought I'd be stabbed from within." Celeste touched his cheek gently, her eyes searching his. Then maybe the enemy expects you to look everywhere but here. What if the one thing Victoria doesn't see coming is me? His brow furrowed. Celeste, I won't risk you in this. You already have, she whispered. You put me in her sights the moment you chose me over her. I won't sit in silence waiting for her to strike. Her determination silenced him, though his jaw stayed tight with conflict. At last he pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest. Then we fight together. But if she comes for you, I'll burn the world to keep you safe. The following evening, Victoria made her move. Adrian and Celeste were invited to a high-profile business dinner, an event crawling with reporters and powerful figures. Celeste knew it wasn't a social gesture. It was a trap. Still, Adrian insisted they go, his arm linked with hers, both of them stepping into the lion's den with heads held high. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the air thick with perfume and whispers. Cameras flashed as Adrian guided her inside, his hand protective at the small of her back. But when Victoria entered moments later, the room seemed to bend toward her, drawn to her magnetic cruelty. She approached them like a queen, her smile cutting, her voice dripping with mockery. Adrian, darling, and his little contract bride. Tell me, Celeste, how does it feel to know the only reason he married you was to save himself from me? The cameras turned instantly, hungry for scandal. Celeste's breath caught, her heart hammering. Adrian moved to shield her, but she stepped forward before he could speak, her voice steady though her knees shook. It feels like he chose me over you, and that is why you'll never win. Gasps rippled through the crowd, the reporters scribbling every word. Adrian's eyes burned with pride, but Victoria only smirked, her expression one of cruel amusement. Very brave, my dear. Let's see if that bravery lasts when I unveil the truth. Tomorrow, the world will know about your contract, your lies, your little arrangement, and when it does, both of you will be finished. She swept away, leaving a trail of whispers and flashing cameras in her wake. Celeste's fingers trembled as Adrian took her hand and led her from the ballroom. In the car, silence pressed thick between them until Adrian spoke, his voice harsh with determination. She wants war. Then war is what she'll get. Tomorrow we end this on our terms. Celeste turned to him, her heart torn between terror and love. And how do we do that? Adrian's storm-gray eyes met hers, filled with a dangerous fire. We tell the truth before she can twist it. Everything. The contract, the lies, and the one thing she never expected. Celeste's breath hitched, the words heavy with both fear and hope. And what is that? Adrian's hand closed around hers, his voice steady and raw. That somewhere along the way I stopped pretending, and I fell in love with you. The world outside rushed past in blurred lights, but inside that car, Celeste felt the weight of destiny pressing down. Tomorrow the truth would be revealed, and with it, their last chance to either survive or shatter forever. The morning broke heavy with tension, the kind that made even the sunlight feel cold. Reporters gathered outside the gates of Adrian's estate, their cameras poised like weapons. The story had already leaked, rumors of a contract marriage, whispers of betrayal, and by noon, the world would know everything. Celeste stood at the window, her hands clenched so tightly her nails bit into her skin. She could almost feel Victoria's shadow looming over them, ready to crush whatever fragile hope she and Adrian had built. Adrian entered the room, his suit sharp, his presence radiating control, but she could see the strain etched into his features. Today was not a business deal, not a hostile takeover. Today was a battle for their lives, their love, their very names. He took her hand, his grip strong, his storm-gray eyes burning into hers. Once we do this, there's no turning back. They'll know everything. Celeste swallowed hard, her heart hammering. Then let them know. I'd rather stand in the fire with you than hide in the shadows alone. The press conference was held in the grand hall of the estate, its marble floors gleaming beneath the harsh glare of lights. Reporters filled the space, their voices a restless hum, cameras flashing as Adrian stepped to the podium with Celeste at his side. He didn't let go of her hand, a gesture that sent whispers rippling through the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, Adrian began, his voice steady though. The weight of the moment pressed on him. Rumors have surfaced about my marriage, and I will not insult you by denying them. It's true. Celeste and I entered into a contract. It began as a business arrangement. Gasps swept the room, the reporters leaning forward like predators catching scent of blood. Celeste's heart pounded, but Adrian continued, his voice gaining strength. I believed I could control it. I believed I could separate my heart from the bargain. But I was wrong. What started as business has become something real. I love her, and no blackmail or threat can take that from us. The room erupted with shouts, cameras flashing wildly. Celeste stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong enough to carry. When Adrian came to me, I was drowning. He gave me a chance to survive, to create, to live again. Yes, it began with money and desperation, but it became more. It became love, and I will not let anyone reduce what we have to a contract alone. Reporters clamored for answers, their questions sharp and unrelenting. But the room shifted when Adrian's team projected images onto the screen behind them. Proof of Victoria's schemes, her threats, her forged documents, her history of manipulation. Mason stepped forward, presenting evidence that painted Victoria not as the victim she claimed to be, but as a predator who had built her empire on coercion and lies. The atmosphere turned electric. Some reporters looked stunned, others furious at the revelation that they had almost been used as pawns. The cameras turned their hunger away from Adrian and Celeste and toward the absent woman who had orchestrated it all. But Victoria was not one to vanish quietly. As the press conference ended, her voice rang out from the back of the hall. She stepped forward in a crimson dress, her eyes blazing with fury. You think this will save you, Adrian? You think you can stand there with your little artist wife and paint me as the villain? Her words dripped venom, but Adrian didn't flinch. He pulled Celeste close, his arm wrapping protectively around her. This ends today, Victoria. You won't touch her. You won't touch us. Victoria's smile twisted, cruel and sharp. You're a fool if you think love will protect you. I will burn everything you have until nothing is left but ashes. Security moved to escort her out, but not before she leaned in close enough for Celeste to feel the chill of her breath. He may love you now, but when the world tears him down, will you still stand beside him? Then she was gone, swept out in a storm of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. Celeste's heart raced as Adrian turned her toward him, his hands framing her face. His voice was hoarse but steady. Whatever happens after today, we face it together. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Together. And for the first time since the contract was signed, Celeste realized they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for forever. But Victoria's parting words lingered like smoke, a reminder that the war wasn't over. If anything, it had only just begun. The night after the press conference, silence hung over the mansion like a storm waiting to break. The news channels replayed Adrian's confession on every screen, dissecting every glance, every word, every touch between him and Celeste. Some called it brave, others reckless, but all agreed on one thing: their lives would never be private again. Celeste stood on the balcony, the wind tugging at her hair, staring out at the city glowing in the distance. For the first time in years, she felt both free and exposed, as though the walls she had built around herself had been torn down. Adrian stepped out behind her, his presence steady, his warmth chasing away the chill of the night. He wrapped his arms around her, his lips brushing her temple. You saved me today, he said. She shook her head, her voice soft but certain. We saved each other. But the storm was not finished with them. Later that evening, Mason rushed into the study, a grim expression carved across his face. Victoria had been arrested after the evidence was released, but not before she sent one final package to the press. Inside were photographs of Adrian's past, the very images he had fought so hard to bury. They showed him younger, reckless, standing beside men who were now enemies, debts scrawled across poker tables, shadows of a life he no longer lived. The world would see them by morning. Adrian's shoulders sagged under the weight of it. My reputation, everything I built, it could all fall apart. Celeste stepped closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. Then let it Let them see the man you were, because I know the man you are now. You're stronger than your past, Adrian, and you're not alone anymore." For a long moment he stared at her, and then something broke inside him, the last of his walls crumbling. He pulled her into his arms with a fierce desperation, his lips crashing against hers, tasting of fear and hope all at once. When he pulled back, his eyes burned with raw intensity. "I thought contracts could protect me. I thought closing my heart would keep me safe. But the truth is, the only thing that has ever saved me is you." The next morning, instead of hiding, Adrian called the press back to the mansion. Cameras crowded the hall again as he stood beside Celeste, his hand never leaving hers. He looked directly into the flashing storm of lenses and said, "Yes, those photos are real. Yes, I made mistakes. I lost control. I fell, but I fought my way back, and I will not be ashamed of surviving. This woman beside me knows all of it, and she chose me anyway. That is what matters." The crowd erupted in questions, but Adrian silenced them with a gesture. "You want the real story? The truth is simple. I didn't just marry Celeste for business. I married her because somewhere along the way she became my reason to fight, my reason to believe in love again. And today I'm asking her not to be my contract wife, but my forever wife." Gasps filled the room as Adrian dropped to one knee, pulling a velvet box from his pocket. Celeste's breath caught, her vision blurring with tears as he opened it to reveal a ring that glittered like captured starlight. "Celeste Rivera Cross, will you stay married to me, not for contracts or obligations, but for love?" The hall erupted in flashes, reporters shouting, but in that moment all Celeste saw was him, the man who had walked into her life at midnight and turned her world upside down. Her lips trembled as she whispered the only word her heart could speak. "Yes." The ring slid onto her finger, sealing not a bargain, but a bond. Adrian rose, pulling her into his arms, his mouth claiming hers in a kiss that silenced the world around them. For the first time, the applause and the chaos felt distant, unimportant. What mattered was the way his arms held her as though he would never let go. That night, as they returned to the quiet of their room, Celeste curled against him, her head on his chest. She thought back to the moment it all began, the midnight knock, the envelope, the possible proposal. She smiled through her tears and whispered, "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" His lips brushed her hair, his voice a vow against her skin. "I told you sometimes crazy is exactly what we need." She lifted her head to meet his eyes, her voice breaking with love. "And you whispered, 'Trust me.'" Adrian's arms tightened around her as his answer came, steady and true. "I meant it then. I mean it now. Trust me, Celeste. Forever." And as she surrendered to his embrace, Celeste knew their story had begun as a dangerous gamble, but it had ended as something rare and unbreakable. Not a contract, not a bargain, but a love that had survived every storm and would burn brighter than all the darkness left behind.